Guys, I'm still at a loss for words. I have to introduce Erfan, and I actually don't think I can do this man the proper justice, giving him the introduction that he fully deserves. Erfan, to me, is a true artist in the true sense of the word. You know, I'm inspired by everything that he does. And I remember a mutual friend of ours one day said to me, check out this guy named Erfan Daliri. Just Google him, you know, and see what comes up. And I Google him, and one of his spoken word pieces comes up. And if you guys have not seen this piece, it's called The Things I Hear. Google this, because it actually just blew me away. I was in tears by the end of this poem, this spoken word, this real life experience. He's my brother, and I'm completely honored to have shared this stage with him, as well as all the amazing ladies that came up on stage beforehand and opened the door and led the way basically with the songs that they sang tonight. So with that in mind, to further this momentum, I'd like to bring on Erfan to continue this conversation. Thank you, guys.
1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you. Cheers, bro. You would think that if I've gone to all the effort of booking a flight from Tasmania to come up here, to hire a venue, invite you all here, that I would have something prepared. I actually don't. Because sometimes we don't need a show. Sometimes we just need to speak honestly. Sometimes that's the one thing we crave for the most. Something unprepared. Something that is not rehearsed and practiced, but honest and just in the moment. We go through life pretending so much of the time that we care about the insignificant trivialities that we discuss with friends and family, when we don't really, and the other person doesn't really. But because the thing we really want to talk about is so painful, we pretend like we're really interested in on the surface level stuff. And we're dishonoring ourselves and the person whose presence we're in and everybody else who's privy to that conversation. We are so much more noble than this. To pretend, to play games, to hide from the truth, to withhold the truth, to not address the truth. We live in a world where grown men and women are poking each other like scared little children and passing trauma on from one to another, to another, to another. The laws of physics say for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction, but on the quantum scale, the laws of physics don't apply. And we need to stop working on the physical scale. We need to accept that on a deeper level, quantum level if you must refer to it as such, we are in fact alchemists. And this was the purpose of our existence. For us to come into consciousness, to become aware of the self, to feel things that often we don't wish to feel, until eventually we realize that we don't have to pass it on like a contagious disease. That we can receive blows, hold our ground, take a breath, and return kindness. There is no greater magic. There is nothing more dumbfounding than that. When someone calls you a name or breaks your heart, and you just smile back lovingly, without retaliating, able to stay in full presence and recognizing that their actions are also coming from pain and that you don't need to reflect it back and you can take that blow and remain calm. composed, compassionate. Because in our natural state, that's what we are. When we are at peace, when we are calm, when we are meditating, or when we've just woken up, we're kind, we're generous, we're noble. And only when we're flustered, when we're hurt, when we're confused, when we're struggling to deal with the traumas of life, are we cruel and unkind and malicious and vicious. And this is why the resilience training seminars that I do is so important to me, because my whole life I've been working towards projects for social change. And eventually I realized that the center of the universe rests within our chest. And what's going on here is being reflected out in our daily interactions, but on a much larger scale, our global civilization, our entire society is a reflection of what's going on inside. Whether it's environmental devastation, whether it's the way we slaughter and torture animals for our own taste buds, whether it's how we interact with people on the streets, whether it's our economic systems and politics and policies, it's all a reflection of what's actually going on inside here. But in order for us to deal with that, we first have to come to presence and calm. And instead of running wild and confused and hurting through the dark woods, we should stop, take stock, get our bearings, take a breath, and then take a step. But because we're hurting so much, we're trying to run away from the hurt, and in our running away from the hurt, we're causing further hurt. So I realized there's no point trying to plan community development projects or run workshops or speak about anything to do with economics or environment or animal rights or anything if we're not addressing the core of the issue, which is the hurt that we're living with and that we're carrying with us in every day. And we think we can hide it, but we can't. We might not speak about it consciously, which is dishonoring ourselves and the person in front of us. But we can't hide the fact that we're hurting. Anyone who stands still in a busy mall with headphones on so they can't hear the busyness of what's going on around them and just listens to some peaceful classical music and looks around them will recognize the hurt and the pain and the trauma that every one of those people walking past them is in right now. It doesn't take much to see it. And when we come to that space, when we come to that place of calm, content, peacefulness, and we acknowledge that the hurts that we have suffered at the hands of others, some complete absurdities that had no sense or reason, when we sit with them and do not act from that space, we can transmute. And you just saw what it looks like with Sandra's art, with Sian's art, Isaac's poem, and Bobby's show. That's turning horror into beauty, pain into joy, fear into love. Bobby's ability to remain resilient and strong and not break and not become bitter and cold and angry allowed you to feel love for yourself, for someone else who's gone through a similar experience, for others who you haven't even met yet. Fear, pain, was just turned into love right in front of your eyes. It's pretty special, huh? No one else can do it if we don't. And sometimes in life, some things will hurt you so deeply that the thought of it happening to anyone else is what keeps you up at night. But I'd like for some of us to be able to avoid that hurt and to feel empathy and compassion and to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and feel for their experience, because that's the fastest way of learning and evolving, But if we cut ourselves off from someone else's trauma or hurt or suffering, because we're dealing with our own and we can't handle anyone else's, and that's one learning we haven't taken in, and life will find a way for us to experience that. So in those moments where everything is fine, and we have processed our hurt, we need to sit with what else is going on around us and understand that that is not separate to us. Nothing that happens in this world is separate to us. Our thoughts and our internal emotions are exuding from our presence into a shared environment. And at any moment you can tap into that and you can feel that and you can acknowledge the collective trauma that we're going through. And we can pretend it's not going on by busying ourselves with the rush of life, with trivialities, with drugs and alcohol, with parties, with work and career, and putting a house over our heads and all the rest of it, and find additional complications to sew into our lives so we can keep ourselves busy. Or we can calm down, acknowledge that we're hurting, that there's things that we have left unspoken, and then we can address them. But when we don't, life will bitch slap us. Not out of vengeance or anger. Life hurts us out of love. There are certain seeds that will not sprout until a bushfire passes through that region, and the intensity of that heat cracks it open. And then the potentiality for it to sprout is actually there. But until that intense heat, that trauma, that blow is received, that seed cannot sprout. But then once that trauma has been felt, once that bushfire has passed through, the seed then has the capacity to sprout. It's not inevitable that it will. It can still remain a seed if it wants to. And our identity, our sense of self, our story, this thing that we think is us, it's just an ego. It's a story that we cling on to because we have little control over anything else in our world. Everything is moving and changing so quickly, but what we do have control over is our individual story. So we write it so meticulously and perfect it and say, this is one piece of the universe that I have control over. And it becomes really important to us. And when someone hurts us, they're not hurting our true essence, they're hurting our story that we're clinging on to, our identity that we've crafted over years. And it's fair enough, I can understand. I mean, I obviously got one as well. That's why I feel hurt. But that ego is a shell, like a protective layer around the seed that is holding within it the potentialities of an entire rainforest. And it has to crack open and fall apart, and it hurts sometimes. So when we are in trauma, if we can come to a place of presence and recognize that this is what's happening, and that part of me that's hurting right now can fall off and die, and I will still breathe, and I will still be alive, and I can actually breathe through this and feel less pain with each breath that I take. It makes life more bearable. The absurdity isn't so maddening. Addictions are the exact antithesis to the purpose of our existence. Evolution, growth, change, adventure through all of the worlds of existence was why we were created. And addiction is the exact opposite of that. Habit, behavior, story, and ego. That's our greatest addiction, our story of self. And sometimes our egos, our identities, our stories of self are created, for the most part, before we were even aware of what was happening. From 0 to 15, largely, our sense of self is crafted when we're at the mercy of the world. I had very little control over our education, our experiences, our friends, our contacts, our religions, our race, our genetics, none of that. But by clinging on too hard to that identity that we had no control over creating, we are failing to see to the very purpose of our existence. And oftentimes we will go through life unconscious of the fact that we are creating experiences so that we can remind ourselves of our identity. Some of us continue to find ourselves in certain types of relationships. Some of us seem to find ourselves always struggling to make ends meet. Some of us flourish through life and live abundantly without having to work too hard for it. And it's all just patterns, behaviors, and egos. So by holding on to our ego, our identity self, we're not only causing ourselves more hurt and pain, we're also failing to recognize the very purpose of our existence. Flux, change, growth, evolution. There are worlds beyond this world yet to be explored by us when we leave these bodies. And in this world, we have certain limbs and faculties and senses that we have developed in a previous world that we need here. In the womb, the child develops limbs and fingertips and ears and eyes, and it's these things that help it navigate this world. And while we are here, we are navigating, we are developing the limbs with which we will navigate the next world. And it's right here. Intuition is how you exist in the next realm. And if we don't clear this out, this house that's full of dust and mud and cobwebs, and we close it off because it hurts too much to look inside of it, we are cutting short our own progress. So it's on so many levels, it's so important to address what's going on in here, to not cause each other any further harm, to be free of hurt for our own selves, but then to also develop the limbs with which we will navigate the next world. But it takes courage. And resilience. I ask people sometimes what they think they might get out of a resilience training seminar with me. And they say they want to grow some balls, or they want to harden up. For starters, balls are weak and flimsy and very fragile. But that's not resilience, that's hardness. And if we harden, we will be broken. Resilience is to receive a blow and be unfazed. Nature is the most powerful thing on earth, and she will outlast all of us because she's vulnerable and resilient and can take and transmute and return. Like a wave in the ocean, when it comes to you and you're not prepared to receive it, if you harden up, she will knock you down. But if you recognize that, oops, I'm not going to get over the top of this one's going to hit me over the head, and you relax, you'll find yourself again, and you'll balance and resurface. Resilience is about flexibility. It's about being able to walk through life carrying such an immense amount of love that nothing can make you angry. Nothing can force you to retaliate. And nothing can break you. Like break you not in the breaking of the ego shell self, rather break you like to make you bitter and cold. We see that happening all the time. And we can't blame them for shutting themselves off because we've done the same thing. So what I'm asking of you is to show the courage to receive what the world is giving us, which is darkness. This world is full of pain and suffering and trauma. And there is no utopia to be arrived at. This is the state of this world. It is in constant flux and change and growth, construction and destruction. And it's up to us to receive it and return it into beauty. That's what nature does. She turns compost into fruit. That's what we're here to do, but we're here to do it consciously, because we are beings with self-awareness and free will. Nature just does it because that's what it's designed to do, and we are here to look and witness at what is happening around us, to learn from nature, and to become it, but consciously, and turn dirt and shit into sweet scented flowers and fruit. Nothing will break you forever. Nothing can bring your existence to an end. There is only a beginning to life. Regardless of what we go through, there is nothing that can end you. We can transform and transmute ourselves and leave this form and enter another form, but nothing can end you. So whatever we feel that hurts us, we just need to recognize that I'm just feeling this right now. And there was a time before this feeling, and there will be a time after this feeling, and I can just sit with this right now, and it'll be okay. And in this moment, each and every one of you can consider a memory, an act, a time when you were hurt. And if you sit with it, you can make yourself feel that trauma again. Or you can come back to your state and say, right now, I am safe, and I'm warm, and I'm loved, and surrounded by loved ones and those who love me. It's an incredible power, this mind of ours. And we tell it where to go. We tell it which memories to reinforce and which ones to let go of. And we can move ourselves a long time whenever we want to a future possibility that we want to create, or to a past memory that we still hold on to that angers us and hurts us. But at any point, we can decide to turn a previous trauma into a work of art, and to no longer refer to it as hurt or pain, but learning and growth. And that is literally the only thing that we were created to do. There's nothing else to see to in this world. There's no other purpose. There's no other goal or ambition. There's nothing else to do but to become a self-aware, conscious being that is able to turn anything into anything. And then when you're free of this body, you can create worlds of your own. But while we're here, and even after we've arrived at this realization, there are still others who have not yet done so. There are still others who are hurting. There are still others who are in trauma and don't know how to process. Others who are struggling to come to terms with the absurdity of it all. And their field of vision, because we're in hurt, becomes smaller. And the smaller your field of vision becomes, the less everything else makes sense. But the broader your field of vision becomes, the more everything else makes sense. Like a clock with gears. A single gear makes no sense. And when we're hurt, we have tunnel vision. The world becomes darker. And we can't make sense of it all. And we need to recognize that there are people who are living like that right now. And the world doesn't make sense to them. And while it's not making sense to them and they're hurt, they're stumbling around hurting others. And it's up to us to help each other along. It's like when an idea pops into your head, it's just a tiny little idea, but your head is massive and it's got all these different ideas in there already, pre-existing, some really reinforced, but a new idea just pops in. And it takes a very long time for that tiny little seed of an idea to spread throughout your mind and become so strong that it becomes an undeniable belief. And then it becomes embodied in your whole being. And those of us who are aware of what's happening in this life are like the beginnings of that tiny little idea in the head. And it's up to us to remain active and vigilant so that we can spread. And that the entire body of this existence can come to the same realization. That there is no separation between anything. I don't think I'm going to take up any more of your time tonight. I'm going to leave you with that. So thank you.